ready to do this one? We're gonna find out. So, what'd you think?
Mixed feelings.
Okay.
Definitely still processing. Given that you watched it yesterday.
I've had a day to process and do a little research on this movie.
Yeah. I just stepped out of it, like, literally a couple minutes ago. So, yeah.
So this is Vice.
Yeah.
The new Paul McKay.
Adam McKay.
I don't know where I got Paul. Adam McKay.
Paul McCartney.
That's probably what happened too.
Probably.
The new Adam McKay political dramedy from the man who brought you, from the person who brought you Anchorman 1 and 2.
To be fair, that's where he started. Now they are big on advertising him as the guy who brought you The Big Short.
Which I'm convinced after watching this was kind of a lucky break.
He's still learning.
Okay, now just general thoughts. Did you like it?
Define like.
Did you think it was good?
See, I consider a good movie to be a movie that accomplishes what it sets out to do.
And this one doesn't?
I feel like it does to an extent, and it sets out to do something that no other movie has really attempted yet, which I think is admirable on a certain level, but at the same time, I'm not entirely sure what it's trying to do.
Okay, so I'm not the only one who got that vibe.
Yeah.
Okay, it makes me feel a little better, because I was driving me nuts, because I was thinking about it all day. Whereas, like, I don't really know what he was trying to do with this, because it feels like it's trying to take a shot at Republicans, but it doesn't really target all Republicans, and only targets Cheney's people.
It's not, though. It's not.
But then they use all the Trump imagery at the end.
Because none of the Trump stuff would exist if it weren't for the Bush administration.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And what they incited and how Cheney chose to do politics.
What do wildfires have to do with that?
And
natural
I think
disasters.
that's a shot at global warming.
I guess.
And the fact that, you know, he headed an oil company and they famously undercut a whole lot of environmentally friendly stuff, including the Carter measures.
Which is not in the movie.
Yes, it is.
Is it? I must have that part.
They first...
I know they meant they had that focus group
when Carter gets brought in, near the beginning, when Carter gets brought in after Nixon resigns... after Nixon resigns and Ford does the rest of his term, and then Carter gets voted in, he does the whole solar panel thing, right? And then it shows when, you know, the Reagan administration and everything comes in, they take the solar panels out.
That's right. Okay.
So it's kind of a quick shot. You really have to be paying attention.
Kind of a blink if you miss it.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that they do in a more metaphorical approach during this movie, which is kind of why I have such mixed feelings about it, because some of those things are very clever, concise ways to convey something that you do have to pay attention to catch, like that. But then some of them are just very on the nose, like all the fishing metaphors.
Yeah.
I feel like Adam McKay is still figuring out how to do a more serious movie. I feel like his more clever style was more suited to, you know, financial industry scandals and stuff.
It worked a lot better in The Big Short, for sure.
It did work a lot better there, but at the same time, this movie also went a lot more serious when it did go serious. So I would say this is kind of a learning point for him, and it stumbles in a couple points, but at the same time, someone's had to do a fucking piece on this piece of shit for a long time, and I'm really glad that someone actually put in the time to do this. And Christian Bale did a fucking bang-up job.
I'm like, there's no argument Christian Bale did a great job there. Like, there's no contestant. Yeah. That being said, I honestly thought this movie kind of sucked.
I'll be completely honest with you. After the fake credit sequence in the middle of the movie, I felt like it was too long.
Yeah.
Halfway through the movie, I felt like it was too long, and it was like a little over an hour. It doesn't feel... It simultaneously feels rushed and
Drags
not
out.
concise enough.
No, I agree with that. I think for me, I said this on Twitter because my theater experience is kind of weird because I was in a packed theater by the entire back row to myself because I know less than like 4 different group of people that went down. I must have had a really big fuck off vibe going on because they went down, sat down, then 5 seconds later they went up and moved to a different chair. So I don't know what happened. Either way, so I'm kind of like I'm twittering while I'm doing this.
Well, this had an interesting for a 4:45 showing. This theater had a surprising number of people in it. It wasn't packed, but for 4:45 on a Thursday, it was weirdly populated.
I think my problem with this movie, just in general, is, for one, it has one of my biggest pet peeves in films, which is the obnoxious narrator.
Oh, the constant voiceover.
Yeah, which I get what he was going for, but to me it's like, this is all stuff that can be explained through dialogue.
True. However,
and to me it came off as really obnoxious and pretentious.
He employed not only the cheap, straightforward tactic of a voiceover, but he also employed more subtle metaphorical shit. So the metaphorical stuff was so poorly done that you didn't catch it.
It's more like
the voiceover stuff is so poorly done that you hated it.
Yeah. So like
it was both too subtle and too on the nose and blatant at the same time.
No, like I get what they're going for with the twist, what happens to that particular narrator, and I was like, okay, I get it. Especially when they linger on the stuff at the end. It's like, okay, I get it.
You
all
sure?
right, I get the fucking heart metaphor.
Because I honestly feel like I feel like the
linger for like what felt like 10 solid minutes.
Now, okay, the narrator. I know he's from Friday Night Lights and everything, but anyone who doesn't give a shit about football recognizes him as Meth Damon. Because
he was in Breaking Bad.
Yeah, he was in Breaking Bad, and he looks weirdly like Matt Damon if he like was allergic to bee stings and got stung by one.
Well, he's also the best part of Game Night, let's be fair.
He's a good actor.
He is.
He's very good, but not good enough for me to give a shit about him enough to know his name. So the thing about it is that he's in there being the voiceover narrator for that. And I found it really interesting because one of my favorite documentaries ever is aggressively voiced over for a good portion of it.
Well, that's a documentary.
Yeah, but it's Inside Job with Matt Damon.
Okay.
So for me, it was kind of like, it was like a weird little inside joke to myself, I guess. Because I don't think that's definitely not intentional.
No.
But it was interesting because Inside Job was done by the same documentarian that did the movie No End in Sight. Mm-hmm. Which, if you want a movie to piss you the fuck off about the Iraq War, that's a great one. Because it goes really deep into exactly how it got to where it was. And just how much it got fucked up. Because the reason that the Iraq War got so fucked up was not just in how, you know, the false pretenses and the ignoring, you know, the investigative committees and basically the very clearly orchestrated falsehoods that were created just for the sake of invading Iraq, especially because Bush wanted to impress Daddy.
Yeah, because of the Gulf War.
Yeah, and Cheney wanting to do that specifically for profit purposes, and you know, and I really don't care if people are like, well, how do you know that? Fucking look it up. I really don't give a shit.
I looked it up earlier today. So.
It's factual. It is absolutely factual. That shit was fabricated for the sake of their money. Like, the Middle East has been torn apart by rich fucking white men trying to make money off of the genocide of people who look like me. So that's just been a thing. So, yeah, I'm a little pissed off right now, because, yeah.
Okay.
But the big thing about it is that the reason that Iraq went so wrong was because after they invaded, they had no game plan.
Yeah.
They had absolutely no plan for what to do after they tore the country to pieces to put it back together again. They just wanted to fucking kill and tear shit up and then make someone else clean up the mess. And what happened there is directly responsible for where we are with ISIS and everything. And
Yeah.
The fact that this movie decided to draw those connections, not as deep as some documentaries and stuff do, but as a movie that is meant to be entertaining, so to speak, as a movie that a bunch of more conservative, older white folks will probably go see, being like, oh, we want to see Dick Cheney. I have to respect the fact that he did that, and even if he did a messy, muddling job about it, did pull it off somewhat competently. Like, I would put this movie at a 5 or a 6 out of 10, but I will still respect its intent.
I will give you that. I'll concede on that point.
And it is a messy movie.
Yeah. That being said, and like this is something that I thought that occurred, and I felt really bad for making this comparison. But at the same time, if I'm going to give those movies shit, I kind of have to give this movie shit for doing the same thing. It reminded me a lot of religious and Republican propaganda films, and that this isn't really going to change, even if it's factual. And like, let's be clear, the stuff that happened here did happen.
You mean like the stylization,
the stylization, and the cartoonish nature it presents the characters? It is not meant to change anyone's mind. It's there to preach to the choir that would already agree with these mentalities.
Well, that's I will definitely give you that. But the thing about it is that it's very hard to look at what Dick Cheney's done and not portray him as cartoonishly evil.
Which leads into the other main problem I had with this movie.
Because he is a terrible, evil piece of shit.
We are not going to disagree on that in any way, shape, or form. Just drink all my water bottles.
I don't care.
Anyway. But my big problem with this movie is the fact that we already know that Dick Cheney is a vile piece of shit. It does not take a lot of effort.
We know?
I mean, most
you and
should.
I do.
Yeah.
But you gotta remember the narrative of the country. You gotta remember that a lot of people in the wake of Trump, even a lot of Republicans, were like, oh, I miss W.
I mean, we're not talking about W, though. We're talking about Cheney.
I know, but you gotta remember that a lot of people were totally fine with the Bush administration and what was going on.
Okay, let me put this
You gotta remember that Cheney was doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes, and a lot of people still don't know what the fuck he was doing. People don't know that he had a special committee put together off the record to discuss where the largest oil deposits were in the Middle East and how to get to them. Mm-hmm. Like, that wasn't even mentioned in the movie, I think.
No, it's not.
There's like, this dude straight up did so much stuff off the books, and even the stuff that he did that's on the record, he stayed out of the public eye for most of it. Like, you and I may have a certain awareness of certain things because we paid attention to that stuff, but you gotta realize the majority of the American public has no idea what Dick Cheney did.
Either way, my point though is, let me put it this way: the movie, the audience this movie is geared towards or they're gonna like this movie, gonna agree the politics behind it, pretty much already know that Cheney's a vile piece of shit. Sure. Let's go with that, for example.
But I don't think they understand the depth of where he went, or even the fact that he came from the Nixon administration. Like, a lot of people just saw him pop up during the Bush era as Bush's vice president.
That's actually not true. It was actually, I think he was the chief of staff during the Gulf War.
No, I'm saying, but a lot of people saw him pop up during that time, because you also got to remember that in the early 2000s, that was when the internet was starting to become more popular and more people had access to more information. It was very easy before that to ignore the fine details of political workings.
But he was still a pretty well-known political figure around that time when he was chief of staff.
If you paid attention, if you gave a shit about who the chief of staff was, because a lot of people fucking don't. Like, I couldn't tell you who Clinton's chief of staff was. Like, I just didn't. And when it came to how politics changed all the way through, even if you were aware of Cheney in the 80s, maybe you weren't aware of him in, like, the Nixon era, or the fact that him and Rumsfeld worked together back in the day. Like, there's a lot of really solid background that this movie gives that I think was actually kind of... It's interesting, because this movie's kind of two movies.
In what way?
There's the first half of the movie, before the fake credit sequence, which is him just leading his political career and, you know, being a conservative like, back in the 90s and earlier. And then there's the second half where he gets called upon to be vice president by George W. Bush. And he makes his push for power, and he starts making real... You know, he becomes a real fucking power figure and basically controlling everything that happens. And when you see that shift, they are very much two different movies, because the first half is about him. And, you know, how he came to be what he is. It's more about his character. The second half is more about what he did.
Is it about his character, though? That's kind of my main issue with the movie. I mean, but here's the thing. Like, and this comes back to the point I keep trying to bring up, is the fact that the narration does all the development for you. But there's like, I know I was got to the point where I started counting the minutes I would pass for obnoxious narration would come in, do an entire history skip or entire character skip. There are very few sequences where characters are allowed to say more than a few lines to each other before some either narration gimmick or some other dumb gimmick comes up to interrupt the action. By the time the movie ends, begins and ends. First off, Cheney has not changed at all, which makes it more jarring when you have lines.
By the time the movie all the way ends? At the very end of the movie?
I mean, physically he does, but the character's pretty consistent through the entire movie.
No.
You don't think so? Because like I saw no arc, there's no development.
One of the big pushes throughout the whole movie is how his relationship with Mary changes. It shows from when Mary was a little girl all the way up to the point where he gives Liz approval to betray Mary publicly. But that's the B
plots.
Yes, but those are the things that make up the meat of the character, supposedly.
That's not good enough, though.
It's what you get in the overall context. Because you gotta remember how much shit is going on. Not only are you developing his relationship with his daughters, kind of, and his relationship with his wife, kind of, but you're also, you know, you have the plot thread of his health going through the movie, but then you also have all the different political stuff that's going on in terms of like the different characters that pop up throughout the movie.
I mean, you can do that with that obnoxious narration, though.
You can, but you won't. Not in this one.
All right, but like that doesn't forgive it in my
Adam
mind.
McKay is not a good enough filmmaker outside of bit comedy, like ridiculous comedy, to pull off a movie that is this complex, or could be this complex, without some kind of narration to hold it together.
And that's the problem.
Yes.
Okay, so we're on the same page on that.
Yes, in that sense, no. The quality of the filmmaking, like I said, it's like
it's a well shot movie.
It's about a 6. Oh yeah, no, it's well made in certain ways, but it's also very poorly made in other ways.
It is, and it's very
structured poorly.
It is okay, and like the characters, in my opinion, are just very, very shallow.
Sure, but the character arc, I mean, you know, my fucking liberal bleeding heart, my heart broke for fucking Mary. Like when she's making that phone call to her mom at the end, like I knew you guys fucking approved this. I was like, ah, fuck, you know.
Yeah.
Or even when she ran out of school and got in the car crash and confesses to her mom and dad that she's gay. You know, that was a pretty. Those are like the lone properly emotional moments in the movie.
But that encapsulates maybe 10 minutes of the movie total.
Sure, sure, but there's a lot going on in this film. So you got to look at the fact that he went from doing the very unlikely, unexpected thing for a conservative from their time, in just being like, we don't care, we love you no matter what, to being the guy who's like, throw your sister's happiness, like potential legal right to exist as a human being, under the bus for your political gain. Like,
and maybe that was more of a focus rather than just what felt like an afterthought. Like, that could have worked more.
But it's part of the highlight of how much he increasingly lost his will to be, you know, a decent person over the years.
But that movie never presents him as a decent person, even from the very beginning.
It kind of tries to from the beginning.
Not
it makes
really.
him somewhat sympathetic. Maybe not to someone like you and me.
Like, but how is he sympathetic though? From the very beginning, like the most we get as far as his motivation goes, outside of power for power's sake, is at the very beginning when Amy Adams yells at him.
Yeah, he wants to be better for his wife.
Yeah, and like
he wants to be better for his kids. He cares about his family,
which I guess is supposed to be like the main motivation, but I don't feel like that. Like it's not explored at all.
But that's the main thing. Like he's a dude with problems. He's a dude who has issues like with other men and everything. But the problem. The way he gets his shit together and actually tries to do something is because he cares for his family and he wants to not become just some drunk slob.
I would have loved if the movie actually showed me that.
It did.
But like through the narration, it's tell, don't show.
It had a couple of scenes where he actually had that interaction. It didn't narrate those scenes. Then he just shows up in the fucking White House and becomes what Donald Rumsfell's intern, and he's basically like he wants to be a good political person, but then what he learns, remember that moment where he asks, what do we believe?
Yeah.
And Donald Rumsfell just laughs in his fucking face?
Yeah.
That was a defining moment for his character. That was the point where he realized that he kind of wasn't going to be able to be great if he wanted to have any actual, like, principles. That's when he figured out that this is a game.
See, like, I thought he saw it as a game way before then. Like, that's the way the movie portrayed it to me, anyway.
Well, it's the fact that he realized that there were no real guiding principles. Because up until that point, he was like, well, you know, I'm a conservative, and I can have these values or whatever. But he didn't really present those values, but he seemed like somebody who had certain guiding principles and goals.
I guess my point here is more the fact that, yeah, you can get those things out of the movie, especially if you know your history about the topic. That being said, I don't think the movie presented that in any cohesive manner.
It presented it in a very touch-and-go way, because it was the very, very beginning.
But it's also,
as
it's
he went
paper
further,
thin. It's paper thin.
Yeah, this movie isn't that deep.
And that's kind of my issue with it.
It's not meant to be, though.
That doesn't make it okay.
It kind of does.
How so?
Because it's not trying to be deep. Again, for me, a movie is measured by what it sets out to do, and like.
But even you said it didn't really do that.
It doesn't really accomplish all of its goals properly. What I'm saying is that it's not trying to be a particularly deep movie. It's a movie that tries to cover a lot of information, but it's not a movie that's trying to be particularly heartfelt. It's not trying to give you deep characters. It's trying to show you this character as a story.
But that constantly goes back to the issue I was talking about, which is preaching to the choir. Which is like, this is like, because it's so geared towards a liberal idea, which again, I'm not opposed to it, because God knows I have liberal ideologies too.
Yeah.
But my point is the fact that it's like, this is a movie that's going to change anyone's mind because it doesn't actually go into characters. It's more like, and like, I feel like for a movie that's going to talk about Dick Cheney, like, for
it's a presentation of a bunch of facts back to back.
But why can't I just look that up online rather than waste 2 hours of my life watching it?
How many people are going to look that up online?
People that would go see this movie, evidently.
Like, why would you go watch any documentary?
My point is because for me, I'm a big character person, just in general.
I think that's your problem. You're trying to see this as like a drama that you're supposed to get involved with the characters with, and care about the characters.
I don't necessarily care about the characters, but I need to find them interesting, or at least like someone I like. Even as evil as they are, like I still kind of want to know, like.
Okay,
if you're gonna talk about somebody like Dick Cheney, I want to see someone besides, oh, he was really bad.
Well, but it didn't. It was like, look, he used to give a shit about people, and that got completely hammered out of him.
I never got the impression that he cared about anyone.
He cared about his family.
Except Mary and his wife, like in the beginning.
That's it.
But beyond that,
do you know how many fucking Republicans only care about their fucking families? Do you know what a guiding principle it is for a lot of fucking conservative people to just look out for your family and look out for your own, and that's it? Mm-hmm. That's it. That's his characteristic. That's his defining trait. Mm-hmm. And he does that, and within that scope, that means that he is what that person should be. But even outside of that, even as he moves on in his life, he loses that defining characteristic. It's not meant to be a complex character.
Okay, what can you tell me about Amy Adams' character then, for example?
She's
a woman that has lines sometimes.
No, she's his wife who like wants a husband that's gonna make something of himself, and tries to support him. She's not a very complex character in the movie. She's just there.
And again, that's kind of my personal problem with it.
Why?
Because again, like, and it comes back to the fact, like, if you're gonna do that kind of,
what did you want this movie to be?
I wanted like an actual good biopic.
Okay. So I think. Okay, so let's look at this in the context of The Big Short. Mm-hmm. Did you enjoy that movie?
I liked it fine.
Okay. Did you give a shit about any of the characters?
I thought they were better developed than this.
Really?
Yeah.
How?
They had arcs. Steve Carell in that movie had an arc. Hell, even Christian Bale had an arc in that film. I felt the characters there were better written, better developed. I felt like they had more.
They had more clever dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
But they weren't necessarily better developed characters. All you got from them in that movie was they started off being like, oh, this is happening, and at the end being like, oh, well, this is what's going to happen, so this is what we have to do about it, and maybe this goes against some of our morals.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly the movie was just recounting a series of events with some characters that had some interesting dialogue written throughout. Now, you can't really say it's really a deep movie, but it's just a presentation of a series of facts, right?
Mm.
Now, when you're watching a documentary, now really good documentaries will just fucking suck you in.
Yeah.
And really get you into those characters. But when you're talking about documentaries that are kind of just like hopping around on different things and trying to go through a lot of information in a row, you might not necessarily get there. And I love some really good documentaries, so I understand that I'm kind of undercutting it with that. But I guess my point with it is that I didn't expect this to be that. I didn't expect what you seem to have been expecting out of this movie. I expected a movie where, like, none of the characters... Basically, I expected something that would give me what a lot of, like, cheap TV shows do, which is characters that are basically one or two notes, and what's considered a character arc is a character, like, having one trait kind of change over the course of the movie, and using it to present plot points. And that's it. It's not really...
That doesn't sound like a very good movie, though.
It's not in that sense. It's not very good in the sense of a character development or a drama. It doesn't do that well.
But that's what it's advertised as, or like a dramedy, more accurately.
Yes, because that's what sells.
But even then, it's also not a documentary then. So what is it?
It's a pseudo documentary.
Okay.
It's like a dramatic recreation of a lot of stuff. It does try to portray certain... I feel like the reason that it tries to show more personal parts out of Cheney's life is specifically to be like, okay, this isn't just a full-on smear piece. Like, we're trying to show like that he cares about some people, like his daughters. But when it comes to the point of the movie, I feel like it was to show where these people came from. Like, showing that they came from the Nixon administration, very important. Showing how that perspective led up through the Reagan administration and where it led to in the first Bush administration, through to how you got to the W administration, and then what he did once he was there. Like the scene that the movie opens with what he does on the morning of September 11th. That's important information, because a lot of people don't know what Dick Cheney was doing on September 11th. A lot of people don't know how he took control, or the fact that he was looking up, like, legalities of what he was allowed to take over and do. And what he moved on to do from there. The fact that he was behind leaking that the undercover CIA agent's identity, because her husband was critical of him of their actions in the New York Times, like shit like that.
I mean, yeah, those are facts. I just don't I'm not saying those facts are bad to present.
Yeah.
Or they're bad to say. 'Cause I agree, they absolutely do need to be said. But I want a better package.
But he presented that in like 15 to 20 seconds.
That's
the thing. This movie,
I think the way it's described it best on Twitter was, I basically said, like, for a movie that's almost 2.5 hours long, it's kind of amazing how much of a rush it is and how uninteresting it is in letting people talk. Yeah. And that basically encapsulates how I feel about this.
The second half of the movie is where it gets really rapid fire with...
Even the first act is pretty rushed.
The first act feels
not as rushed, but it's going through the paces pretty fast.
The first act feels like a sloppily made HBO series about, the beginnings of Dick Cheney.
Which, honestly, as an HBO series, is actually not a bad idea.
It's not! And I feel like they do a better job.
They would.
But then, once you get to the Iraq War and everything, I feel like that's where you get to the information that's more important. And I very, very specifically remember when they showed that footage of them bombing Iraq, I still remember the moment I saw that in real life.
remember too.
They meant to hit a certain emotional chord, and they really did. And granted, it's a pretty easy shot.
Is it is it in a way that's earned, or is it in a way that's just manipulative, though?
I feel like it was more of a contextualization. Okay. Because at this point, so much shit has happened. Mm-hmm. So much has happened, especially over the past couple of years. If we're talking about how, especially liberals, have kind of been fucking traumatized by the assault on our beliefs and culture over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
And our loved ones. Like, we tend to forget how it felt to be part of a world where, you know, literally every single country on the planet was telling Bush, like, you can't fucking do this. There's no evidence. Like, we've had 3 investigations. They haven't found anything. Mm-hmm. You can't do this. And you basically had him going like, oh yeah, we're going to do this. And people were wondering, there's no fucking way he can do this. Mm-hmm. And you had that administration basically spit in the face of everybody in the world and destroy a sovereign nation that had done nothing to hurt us. Like, I still remember walking into my friend's house and just my backpack slipping off my shoulders and just staring numb at this TV screen of those buildings blowing up and realizing they actually did it. Mm-hmm. And knowing that things were not going to be the same. In a weird way, not too differently to how I felt when September 11th happened. Mm-hmm. Where I looked at the TV and I was like, this is going to change everything.
Yep.
The way that we invaded Iraq was very similar in the way that it affected how we were going to do things in the future. So the way that they kind of tapped back on that kind of took me back out of the whole, like, oh, hey, I'm kind of bored with this movie right now, to now we're getting to the parts that pertain to shit that I remember, things that changed the world around me and how I saw things could happen, and changed, you know, America in a very fundamental way. And I feel like from that point, when I was watching the events that were happening, I didn't give a fuck about the characters. I was looking at the sequence of events that was unfolding. Because, God, what was that?
Can you argue that's kind of manipulative in its own right? That's relying on historical imagery to evoke reactions rather than what's actually happening in the film?
No. How else would you portray it?
I'm just asking. I'm simply asking your opinion on this.
No, I don't think it's manipulative. I think it's the right way to do it, kind of. Because I honestly think it's somewhat more manipulative to show footage of actors playing these civilians in those villages right before they got bombed.
That's right. I forgot about that part.
Yeah. That is technically more manipulative. But what is filmmaking if not emotional manipulation? It's a question of how it goes about it. Yeah, and whether it's ham-fisted or not.
Well, like I'm kind of thinking back to like other examples. I'm thinking like this movie didn't quite have the gut punch that it wanted to have. To me, anyway. But there's like I can think of like 2 movies off the top of my head that kind of took a similar approach, but it wait like by the time the movie was over, you actually something going like, oh, holy shit, which is Spotlight and Black Hate Klansman.
I haven't seen Black Klansman yet. It's on my list, but I saw Spotlight last week, actually, for the first time.
Oh, no kidding.
Holy shit.
Yeah, like, that's how you do that fucking shit.
No, that was an astonishingly well-made movie. It was powerful for me, but my girlfriend grew up Christian, and she...
Yeah, my girlfriend's Catholic. So.
Yeah, she had a tough time, because she remembered when it happened, and what her family went through.
Now, if you want to talk about a movie that legitimately conveys the shock and the horror of things that happened, Spotlight is a fantastic example of that. Now, granted... Very different format, very different situation. Much harder to do that with the story. I acknowledge that.
Also, kind of a flawless movie with a fantastic script.
Yeah.
Excellent performances all around.
Yep.
An eye for subtlety.
Oh, yeah.
A perfect touch when it comes to just showing just enough of the actual shock and trauma and knowing when to keep it silent in the background and just show people like reacting. Like it had the perfect balance of everything.
It made it.
Spotlight is a perfect movie, okay? It's not fair to compare a movie from the dude who made fucking Anchorman and Step Brothers, all right?
Okay, what about Black Cat Klansman? Maybe a better comparison.
I haven't seen it yet. Don't say anything. But the thing about it is,
when you see it, you'll know you'll know why.
Sure, and I fully believe it. But here's the thing about that. And I have very strange feelings about Spike Jones in general, because I have full belief that Black Klansman is a good movie, but I also saw the Old Boy remake, which makes me so angry considering that the original Old Boy is one of my favorite movies ever.
Fair. You'll get very little argument on that one.
But all that aside, what was that one movie they made about the... It took place in an office. It was literally just like a dozen actors just talking about the fallout from the economic collapse. Basically, it's a movie that takes place on the night of when everything is about to go down with the stock market in 2008. And it's...
When did this movie come out?
I want to say early teens. But the premise of it was basically all these people having this discussion of who was going to shoulder the burden for this, and it's all just a movie about people in the financial industry being like, well, we're not going to fucking take the fall for this, so this is how we pass the buck to other industries, other companies. Like, do you remember what I'm talking about?
I think that was before I started watching movies seriously, so I wouldn't...
It's like at the beginning of the movie, there's a dude who's basically ready to throw himself off the roof.
It's like, I'm getting blurred images, but I'm not getting...
Okay, yeah. Anyway, I remember watching that movie and knowing that all the characters seemed realized, but none of them really had character arcs. It was really just a philosophical discussion of, how this was going to work. It was a debate of like, but this, and this, and this. Well, this is what's going to happen. Can we really do this?
And that can work.
And that can be a very compelling movie.
Yes, I agree.
But I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's not necessary to have necessarily really compelling characters or character development or any of that stuff when it comes to a movie that whose main intent is to hit you with a bunch of facts and be like, look how fucked up this situation was. Okay. And this was the dude in the middle of it.
Fair enough. I will concede to that point. However, to bring it back around to this movie, I would say, like, if you're gonna go that route, if you're gonna like forgo character development, portraying these like kind of I don't want to say over the top, but more straightforward process. If you're gonna do that, I prefer you don't replace it with dumb gimmicks that are just more annoying and then funny or insightful.
That's another interesting thing about the movie. I feel like it's experimental in a weird way.
I can see that.
It has certain heavy-handed metaphors. It has certain ways of editing together the timeline to convey certain emotions. It plays around with where it places what in the film to tell its story. And on a certain level, I have to give it respect for trying to do something weird and different. It's not like the best, and again, this comes straight from The Big Short. The Big Short did a pretty good job with a lot of the stuff, even though, it just has moments that are decidedly cheeseball. Like, here's Margot Robbie in a bathtub to explain this, because we're going to talk about some boring stuff. But overall, the gimmicks of the movie worked, and I feel like in tackling something that was more along the lines... In Big Short or this movie? The Big Short.
Yeah, I agree.
In attempting to tackle something that was a bit deeper and more... we're talking about war crimes here.
To me, it required a more intelligent, deft hand.
Yes.
Than what we got.
Yes, and we didn't get that. But I have to balance that out with, again, the fact that someone chose to take their resources and time and energy and make this movie. This movie needed to be made.
I can respect the effort that went into it. I can respect the intention behind it. I can respect what they were going for.
I appreciate that this movie exists.
I will give you that. That being said, I feel like this was not the right way to handle it, in my opinion.
It could have been done way better. but overall I have to see it as a positive addition to the conversation, simply because it brings a conversation to the table and a lot of facts and ideas to the table that a lot of people were not fucking aware of.
My question is, and this, you see this a lot, especially in the political climate right now, is the fact that how much are the facts actually going to be discussed compared to how much are they just going to bitch about how the people here are betrayed?
They're not. When it comes, because we already have a much bigger conversation going on.
True.
But I feel like even with the massive clusterfuck of everything that's happening right now, it is important to retain a certain level of historical perspective. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be discussed that much. It is being discussed for a bit, like even in the media, like there are conversations that have happened because of this movie, even if it's for a couple of days in the news cycle, if that. There are conversations that have happened online because of that, even if it's just people arguing over how factual the movie actually is, which, cleverly enough, is a good way to get people discussing the actual facts. Like, it's valuable in that sense. And I'm not going to pretend that, you know, like, for example, you want to talk about a really good documentary, we can talk about Inside Job. Came out in 2010, right? It was about just how fucking nefarious the 2008 collapse actually was, like what caused it and everything. But then, what did it accomplish? What did it really do? Who watched that movie and then went out and started talking about, you know, credit exchange, credit default swaps with their friends? Like, no one's gonna do that. This is for personal information. This is to be more aware of the world. Like, what do you get out of watching Planet Earth? You learn some you learn some stuff about the world. Fine. But like it's not really asking what this movie will accomplish is kind of an unfair question. What does any movie fucking accomplish? You know what can you talk about? Fair. A thin blue line? Like, great. You got a case like turned over because of it.
Like, I mean, I guess my point is so much like what movie accomplished, because there's like, I don't know many movies that like change the world fundamentally.
Sure. I mean, you can talk about things like Bowling for Columbine that got good conversations started around philosophical questions for a while, but I have my own issues with Michael Moore's filmmaking processes. Like, there's
or Elephant.
That's different. That movie left me quite shaken, actually.
Elephant or
Elephant.
I never been a big fan of that one.
I was a teenager. I was into weird experimental artsy movies.
That was another case where I admired the intent, but I felt the execution was really hollow and not helpful.
I got into it. But this movie, it's weird because I feel like it's more than, we have to consider it as more than how good of a movie it is.
Okay.
We have to consider what it brings to the table in terms of facts, what people may not know, the conversations it'll start, and the general political awareness. Like, we have to remember that when we see Dick Cheney in the news, when we see Karl Rove in the news even, like, these people are still around. The fact that you tie that kind of crazy fucking rhetoric, like, back around to Alex Jones at the end. You know, the fact that this fire that they started has turned into a fucking inferno.
Even though the movie kind of contradicts itself in the end with the Dick Cheney's final speech.
That I understand, and I definitely had a weird reaction to that too. Because if anything, that pissed me off more than anything in the movie. But I feel like that was also him playing the character.
It was.
Because they immediately follow that up with how self-serving those actions were and how many people suffered as a consequence of his actions.
Well, it's more like when Dick Cheney says, like, you chose me. It's like, well, technically we didn't.
Yeah, and he's like, I'm proud to have served you. And but I think that's the point. I think the fact that it shows throughout the movie that we did not choose him. He fucking manipulated the shit out of everybody around him. And he set things in motion that resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. Like, that man is a war criminal.
I mean,
Truly.
you'll get no argument on that. As far as
Like, God, it's really staggering, the evil that this man has accomplished. And the movie does a really good job of showing the kind of evil shit that he's done. And for him to stand up proudly at the end and being like, I'm proud of what I've done, and you're welcome. And then...
And a lot comes down to Christian Bale's performance, which, like, beyond question, is amazing.
Fantastic. And then immediately it pops up on screen. By the way, here are the personal profits. Here are people who fucking died. Here's what happened to his shattered family afterwards. Like, yeah. No, the movie is very stark in being like, yeah, he feels no shame about this. And realize that he has none of what he just said he has no shame about is actually, like, holds up. So again, I feel like the movie is trying to make a point of contradicting itself deliberately.
You can make that argument, yeah.
And I think that if you actually, like, watch it again and think about it and try to pull apart the different points, you would see that. But I don't think either of us is going to do that. So yeah.
See, I can rewatch Spotlight every now and again, and still get something out of that.
So hard, though.
It is a hard watch, but that's when I'd want to go back and, like, study again.
Yeah.
But I did not get that with this movie, and
there was not a wasted scene in Spotlight.
God, no.
Not a fucking wasted minute. That movie was so tight.
Oh yeah, like you said, it's a damn near perfect film.
Yeah.
I remember I saw that with Karina, but when they showed the actual end credit scene with all, like, the churches that got implicated, and me and Karina were just sitting there like, oh fuck.
Yeah.
Like, that's a movie that hit you. I would say even, like, Dear White People, like, hit me harder than this movie did.
Oh yeah, no, Dear White People did a really good job. But yeah, I think this movie has value. I wouldn't say it's a really good movie.
Fair enough.
But I would say that it's worth watching, and I would say that it definitely added some good stuff to the conversation. I think that I'm glad it was made.
All right.
I think it could have been done better. That's not a question. It could have been done better. But in the end, Adam McKay was the dude who decided that this was what he wanted to do, and he got it done. And I have to respect that on a certain level. He didn't get it done as a fucking Oscar-winning fantastic movie. Like, it's not a classic by any means, but nobody else did this. Nobody else put this fucking time in to get this information out there. And I gotta give him those props and respect it on that level and give it commendation for at least accomplishing what it does accomplish.
Okay, fair enough. I can respect that. All right. Well, I can't think of a better way to end this conversation than that, and you got to go in a few minutes. So,
yep.
Well, that was a fascinating conversation, sir. You gonna be okay, man?
Yeah, I'm just pretty constantly terrified about when my family's gonna die when they nuke Iran. So, you know, all of which was set in motion by this shit.
Yep.
So, yeah, no, well, technically not Dick Cheney. It was set in motion by, believe it or not, people like the original George H.W. Bush when he was director of the CIA. And, the CIA in general, you know, usurping the Iranian government that was democratically elected and chose to take its oil back for itself from England, which was basically enslaving its citizens in the early 20th century. And Churchill teamed up with the CIA to usurp the democratically elected Iranian government, because God forbid anyone gets the freedom that America has. And all that has led to where we are now. And it really is all for oil, which Dick Cheney's a big fan of. So, not to mention all that directly tying into how the planet's dying. And continuously undercutting programs for alternative fuel sources just because they love their fucking money. So yeah, no, I have a lot of very deep feelings about these fucking people, and this was just a whole dump of that shit. So I'm just gonna be mad for a while.
Okay.
Bye.
Do you want a hug?
No, don't touch me.
Okay.